Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. Now, as we saw during our journey through the 1980s, Hong Kong horror films were making a big impression. But during the 1990s, much of Hong Kong's attempts to unnerve and disgust were repackaged, so to speak, and inflicted upon the masses in the form of Category 3 films, also known as Cat 3, the abbreviated term. Now, these films would typically include explicit sex and or graphic violence, thus earning the rating of Cat 3 by the Hong Kong motion picture rating system. Now, I've seen a number of these movies, but I personally would classify most of them as thrillers, action movies, or even sex comedies, not necessarily horror films. Even though many of them do include some horror elements and some dark themes. So this creates a dilemma for me to a certain extent, at least in terms of deciding what films that I want to cover in this Asian horror video series, because, I really want to stay on topic here, which means that I do not want to go off on, too many tangents and include films such as A Chinese Torture Chamber Story, which is obviously a comedy, but it's a Category 3 film. So, with that said, however, I am going to include a few Cat 3 films that have a more horrific slant to them. But it's hard to know where to draw the line here. So if I'm excluding one of your personal favorite Cat 3 films, I apologize in advance. But I do hope to make a separate series of Category 3 movie reviews at some point in the future. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, we can begin to dig into 1992 and 1993. Now, you'll notice that I am now ordering films by least to most favorite by year. So, for example, in this video, I will start my least favorite Asian horror film from 1992, and then progress to my favorite Asian horror film from 1992, then reset and do the same for 1993. So a countdown aspect is now something to look forward to in my videos. But this really won't manifest itself until we get to 1995, because it actually has enough movies in that year to really make a difference between like my favorite and least favorite titles. But please keep in mind, okay, that this ordering system is more of a general order. Okay, so this means that many of the films in the middle section of my videos in the future will be somewhat interchangeable. So, hopefully nobody will ask me, well, why was this film number 7 on your list instead of number 8? So it's just a general ordering. Obviously, the last film I cover in my videos from now on will be significantly better than the first film I cover. But just something to mix it up. Because once you start covering a lot of movies in one particular year, I had to think of a way to order the films. How do I want to cover these films now? Because previously I was always ordering them by year. So if you're covering a whole decade, you just go from, say, 1980 to 1989. It's real simple. But if you have a bunch of films to cover in 1 year, you got to think of a way to order things. So this is my game plan from now on. We'll see how it works out. So, as always, titles for the films that I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So let's start with 1992. And we begin with a pretty terrible film, of course, and that is Mannequin. Japanese horror film, 1992. So this is an extremely low-budget, obscure film about a fashion design assistant who has a psychotic break and begins killing people. Now, unfortunately, I do not remember much about this movie, so I'm going to refer to its very short Wikipedia article. I know I'm shameless in doing this, but I'm just telling you the truth. So the full title of this film is called Go Nagai's Horror Theater, Mannequin. It's a direct-to-video film based on an original story by this man, who appears as part of the cast as well, alongside a bunch of adult video actresses. Alright? So this is, unfortunately, very dry, amateurish stuff for the most part. The terrible production values certainly don't help matters. It's only 54 minutes long, okay, which is usually a good thing for weaker films, but there's really nothing memorable about this at all. Perhaps the most disappointing aspect is that there are no memorable scenes involving actual mannequins. I mean, the film is called Mannequin, for goodness sakes. I think I remember the film being really slow and kind of building to a money shot at the end, but the big scene that happens at the end is just kind of mediocre. So you're sitting there waiting for this ending, and it really isn't worth the wait. So I cannot recommend this one. So yes, of the 8 Asian horror films I've seen from 1992, Mannequin is probably the worst one. Now our next film is not necessarily the worst Asian horror film of 1992, but it's certainly the most disappointing. And I am talking about Dr. Lamb, 1992 Hong Kong horror film. An abnormal taxi driver lusts for blood every rainy night, and several young women are killed as a result. Now, from what I remember of this one, this serial killer is captured fairly early in the film and confesses his crimes to the police, which sets into motion a series of flashbacks for the viewer to enjoy. Now, this Category 3 movie suffers from the common flaws of less entertaining Category 3 films, namely a poor script. Okay, it's something that is prevalent amongst that particular type of film. Sometimes it'll give you the graphic violence, but it's kind of weak in script, but the violence is enough to compensate. Surprisingly, Dr. Lamb doesn't have that graphic violence to compensate. Now, much of the first half consists of dull police work, and the dialogue throughout is not particularly well written. Some scenes are also stretched out for far too long, man. This includes the actual death scenes, which are nothing to write home about. That's a big no-no for Category 3 films, man. You gotta bring the violence in these films, because that's what they focus on. So, not only does this film suffer from the common flaws of Category 3 films, but it also suffers from the not-so-common flaw of non-impactful violence. So in this particular case, given the film's weaknesses, you have to give me the violence. You just have to, and this film doesn't do that. Now, to make matters even worse, the main actor here is Simon Yam, who is one of my favorite actors of all time. He's good here, okay? He's good. Simon Yam is almost never bad, so he's good here, but he's not nearly as menacing as some of his other roles. For example, there was a film by the title of Run and Kill from 1993, a Category 3 action thriller that actually has some punch to it. That film has some serious guts, and Simon Yam is real menacing and memorable in that one. In this one, he's just a guy, typical killer in a movie. And we've seen a lot of those, haven't we? So Dr. Lamb, in my opinion, it's an all-around snoozer, and I really do not understand why this movie is considered to be a notorious film. Because if you searched Category 3 films online and you looked on lists, Dr. Lamb would be relatively high in that list of films to check out. But I'm telling you, lower your expectations if you choose to watch it. This is a sheep in wolves' clothing. So let's continue here. We continue with a 4th installment of a horror franchise, and that is, unfortunately, Shake, Rattle, and Roll 4, 1992, a Filipino horror comedy anthology. Now, this is an anthology of 3 short films. In the first story, entitled Guro, a girl finds out that her teacher is a monster. Now, this has some decent atmosphere and a pretty good monster makeup effects, but it's also really stupid, with some of the dumbest character decisions you'll ever see. I did not like it. The second story in this anthology is called Kapit Bahay. Children in this film are abducted by a monstrous creature. So again, pretty good atmosphere and monster design, but it's just so unimpressive in how it constructs the horror sequences. It feels very amateurish and unimpressive. It just falls flat at the most imperative moments, the most important moments. So I did not like this story as well. Now, story 3, Madre, is about a community of slum ladies who suspect that a manananggal is responsible for a series of brutal murders. Now, the very first Shake, Rattle, and Roll film that we covered had a segment that featured a manananggal, which is basically a folklore monster that separates into 2 halves, one of which is bat-winged, flies through the air, and kills its victims. But yet again, in this anthology, we have a potentially entertaining monster premise that is crippled with incompetent direction. I'm telling you, man, this Shake, Rattle, and Roll 4, I say skip it. It's not worth checking out. Every single short story in this anthology suffered from the same flaws, so there's really nothing to see here. Now, our next film is also a Filipino horror film. But does it rise above the Shake, Rattle, and Roll 4's incompetence? No. No, it doesn't. And that is Aswang from 1992, again from the Philippines. So while fleeing some murderers, a man, woman, and child come face to face with an evil Aswang, which is a woman who can transform into various animals. Now, the runtime here is 2 full hours, which is just excessive in this case. It just leaves chunks of boredom and filler you have to sit through. Now, I did like the early attack scene, and there's a scene involving a tongue that's pretty cool. But most of the other scare tactics simply don't work. The finale is hampered by too much focus on murders, like human murders, and not enough focus on the monster. So, I mean, the production and talent range from mediocre to poor. I mean, you have the production values and the acting talent, the directing talent. It just ranges from mediocre to poor, man. There's not much quality here to cling to. So Aswang was a bit of a disappointment for me. I was really kind of expecting more than that. I think I might have read a few positive reviews online. It just didn't come through for me. So we're starting to get to movies that are, I guess, more mediocre here instead of just emphatically not good. So let's come to the next one here. We're almost to the good movies. Remember, I'm ordering these from worst to best, so stick with me. So our next film is called All Night Long, 1992 Japanese horror. Now, this is the first film in a series of films, but it's unfortunately the weakest installment from the ones that I've seen. Apparently, there are at least 6 All Night Long films, but I've only seen the original trilogy, which are the ones that are most easily and readily available. So the premise here is rather intriguing, actually. 3 teenagers witness a brutal killing and begin to exhibit morbid desires subsequent to being confronted with pain and suffering. Alright, so the character development here is actually pretty good. It's pretty good. Nothing mind-blowing, but it is sufficient for the premise. Regrettably, though, I had a major problem with the acting in this movie. I found the performances to be very poor, and in that particular aspect, really negated the impact of the events that occur on screen. This particular trilogy, the All Night Long trilogy, is primarily known for its grimy tone and violence, but this first entry really doesn't have the impact of its 2 successors. There is some violence here for sure, alright, don't get me wrong, but this is one of the less nasty titles in the series. The finale, it's okay, but not as well executed or as memorable as it probably should have been. This is one that All Night Long is a film that really should have been good, but it just kept shooting itself in the foot. It just couldn't get over that hump. Not a terrible film by any means, and if you're into this kind of thing, you may want to check it out, but I cannot officially recommend it, given the fact that I didn't really enjoy it that much. So now we come to the 3 Asian horror films from 1992 that I actually enjoyed, and they are ordered from moderately enjoyable to highly entertaining. Alright, now the first film here we're going to cover is Tetsuo 2, Body Hammer, 1992, Japanese cyberpunk horror action hybrid. Now our good friend Shinichi Tsukamoto gives us this follow-up to his insane film Tetsuo the Iron Man. This sequel unfortunately does fall short of the original in some ways, but it is still enjoyable. Now, the plot here concerns an underground group of criminals who inject victims with a drug that transforms body parts into weaponry. Tsukamoto here scraps the black and white photography of the original, opting instead to shoot this film in color. Not a flaw exactly, but if you're expecting a duplicate style to the original film, then you may feel disappointed. I have read some reviews online where people were angry that this wasn't shot in black and white and wasn't basically like a very, very similar in style to the original. Regardless, though, I do think that the cyberpunk theme of blending flesh and metal is abundant, and there are plenty of cool images and gory transformation sequences to enjoy. But I would say that this is not quite as nightmarish as Iron Man, partially because the story is more linear and there is less ambiguity present. In my opinion, ambiguity greatly assists like dreamy, nightmarish feelings from the viewer, because dreams tend to be non-linear and somewhat nonsensical. And I think the first Tetsuo film did a great job of portraying that. Now, the scoring in the sequel here is also much weaker than the original film and a bit repetitive at times. But overall, I do think that Body Hammer is a good flick with its fair share of unorthodox visuals. So I would recommend this. Now, what's the DVD availability of this one? Since it's the first film I'm recommending, try to find out if there's a DVD availability out there for you. Now, this used to be highly available on DVD years ago, but now it's a little bit more difficult to find. You can find it on Amazon, but it's the price is inflated quite a bit. So it's kind of easy to find, but at an inflated price. You might have to do some searching online, try to get a bargain on it. But I do recommend this. All right. The next film here from 1992 is a film called Vendetta, a Hong Kong horror thriller hybrid. Now, a police officer kills two violent robbers, a man and a woman, who are twins. But years later, his own twin children become possessed by the spirits of the dead criminals and seek vengeance upon him. All right, in true Hong Kong style, you get kind of a blend here. You get some horror, you get some bloody violence, some action, and some laughable absurdities. It's an entertaining mix indeed, especially when considering that the children are basically toddlers. Oh yes, these are not teenagers or even older grammar school kids. They are indeed vicious toddlers. So if you toss in a sadistic third robber who's a tough son of a gun, you get a fun romp on your hands. This is a good flick. I really enjoyed this one. Moves at a fairly brisk pace. Very, very obscure film, but it was released on DVD back in the day. It used to be widely available. And it is, I would have to say, moderately available now. It's at a slightly inflated price new, but you can get it used at a fairly reasonable price. So this one is, I enjoyed this one, Vendetta. I think it's underrated and underappreciated for its time. Pretty cool flick. Alright, here. Now we're down to basically my favorite Asian horror film of 1992. This is almost like a throwback to the loony, crazy Hong Kong films from the 80s. It's kind of a hybrid between multiple genres, and quite frankly, it's not scary at all, but it is undeniably entertaining. It's directed by Nagai Choi Lam, the man who gave us Ricky-O, the Story of Ricky, that insanely violent action flick from 1991, which I will be sure to cover in a separate review video on my channel at some point in the future. What film am I talking about here? Well, it's called The Cat, also known as The 1,000-Year Cat, a Hong Kong horror action film from 1992. So in this film, check this premise out and tell me it's not the greatest thing ever. A man hires a dog assassin while investigating two alien-human hybrids, led by a warrior house cat, who steal artifacts in an attempt to stop a vicious killer blob with high-voltage slime testicles that can transport itself into human beings. Man, one of the best premises for a movie of all time, and this one definitely lives up to what you might think. The film is awesome. I love this film. The physical effects range from good to terrible, but in either case they serve a useful purpose of provoking laughter. It's not surprising to note that this electrical blob type enemy is downright hilarious, as it carries out its murders because the death scenes are totally outrageous and lots of fun. Now, if that weren't good enough, this also has the single greatest dog versus cat fight in motion picture history, and it's not even close. This dog versus cat fight is phenomenal. And unlike some other Hong Kong films, there were no animals that were harmed in the making of this film. At least it didn't seem like there were when I was watching it. Which makes the dog versus cat fight even more awesome. Just trying to figure out how they did it. So, that scene in and of itself is worth seeking this film out. Now, the characters take everything so seriously here, which only makes things that much funnier. And as an added bonus, Gloria Yip is super cute. The lead actress in this movie, there's something about her. She's just insanely cute. It's like the only word I could come up with her. This is The Cat. It's a truly epic B-grade movie that I strongly recommend. If you can check it out, I definitely would. I mean, obviously you got to be a fan of like nutty cult stuff, but this movie is so much fun to watch. A lot of people, know this director for Ricky-O, The Story of Ricky, but I think The Cat, while not nearly as insane as Ricky-O, it's definitely, in terms of pure entertainment value, it gives Ricky-O a run for its money, I think. Alright, let's move on to 1993, shall we? Now, I've only seen 2 Asian horror films from this particular year. They are both entertaining, and I would say they're worth watching. The first one is very notorious and very popular amongst its fans, amongst horror fans especially. And of course, I'm talking about the Untold Story, 1993 Hong Kong horror thriller hybrid. Now, this is probably one of the most highly regarded Category 3 films. It stars Anthony Wong as a brutal murderer who uses the meat of his human victims to cook up delicious pork buns and serve them to his customers. So Anthony Wong is one of the more popular Hong Kong actors of the past few decades. He's been in tons of movies, a lot of good stuff too. Now, you may have recognized him in films such as Hard Boiled from 1992 or Infernal Affairs from 2002. Now, I personally don't think his performance in The Untold Story is quite as great as many have claimed, but it did grow on me after repeat viewings. You know, Anthony Wong's a good actor, so he's definitely a benefit to this film. Now, a man named Herman Yao co-directed this film. Yao's directing career, in my opinion, has been very hit or miss, but in recent years he has given us a few very impressive action movies, such as The Legend is Born Ip Man from 2010 and The Woman Knight of Mirror Lake from 2011. So in terms of The Untold Story, there's not much here in terms of character development, since the antagonist is mostly a one-note character, and he's somewhat shallow as well. But he does get a lot of screen time, and is basically the main character here. And, it's always nice seeing the bad guy as the main character. You get to spend more time with the antagonist. Now, the themes and shocking violence help to give this movie some entertainment value for fans of cinematic depravity. Some of the violence is actually inflicted upon children, so this movie does have some guts to it for sure. This is not like Dr. Lamb, which is basically, not memorable at all. This film's got some guts. It definitely earns its Cat 3 rating. There's definitely a gritty, grimy feel to it, which is a positive. Now, personally, I think that the pacing does drag a bit during some scenes, particularly the jail and hospital scenes, but overall, I enjoy this one. A lot of horror fans love it, though, so I would say that it's a must-see. The Untold Story, must-see. Now, this, again, used to be very highly available on DVD, but now, very much like The Cat, it's, if you want to buy it new, it's overly expensive, but you should be able to find a used copy somewhere at a reasonable price if you want to check it out. Alright, so finally we're at our last film in this particular video. Last film from 1993 as well. So what do we have here? It's a sequel again, and It's a sequel from a film series that we've enjoyed thus far. And that film is Evil Dead Trap 3, Broken Love Killer, a Japanese horror thriller from 1993. So after a handful of missing girls and dead bodies show up, a lady detective investigates a suspicious teacher. Now, director Toshiharu Ikeda returns to this franchise. Ikeda directed the first Evil Dead Trap, did not direct the second, but he came back to direct this third installment. So does that mean that Evil Dead Trap 3 is similar to the first film in the franchise? No. In fact, it's very different from both of its predecessors. Now, I would enjoy another film that follows the first installment directly, because I did enjoy that one a lot. But on the other hand, I do like the fact that all three of the films in this series are completely different from one another. You know, it offers a nice variety if you're gonna watch all three in a marathon, or just watch all three in general. Now, Evil Dead Trap 3 distances itself even further from the nasty original by having minimal violence. Even the second film had some nasty violence to it. So you got these first two films which got this, emphasized some violence. Third film, not so much. So it's definitely distances itself a little bit. It's more of a slow burner that relies more on mood and thriller-like elements. There's a very nice use of soft, I guess you could say, lighting and color, which creates some atmosphere. The protagonist is a rookie cop of sorts, which makes this movie feel a bit more mainstream than the previous two. But I did enjoy it. I think lots of fans of the original film turned on the sequels because they were different from the original. But I think both sequels have their merits and are entertaining in their own right. If push came to shove, though, I think if I was forced to choose my favorite, I would still choose the first as my favorite of the trilogy. So Evil Dead Trap 3, unfortunately, is difficult to find. Keep looking out for it, though. It definitely makes a nice capper on the trilogy. It's pretty good. So that does it for 1992 and 1993. Probably a bit more lively and memorable than 1990 and 1991 that we previously covered. The Untold Story is the most popular film we've covered tonight, but my personal favorites would probably be The Cat and Vendetta. So be sure to join me in my next video, where we will begin to explore Asian horror from 1993 and 1994. So as always, we'll see you next time.